This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War, Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your name and community in which you now reside.
My name is George E. Kelley, K-E-L-L-E-Y, and I live in Dennis, Massachusetts.
Okay, can you please start by describing how you ended up on Cape Cod?
Well, I was born in Boston. I went to parochial school for 8 years, and finished up at the Brighton High School. That was in Brookline, and wound up in Brighton. Graduated from Brighton High School, and 4 days later, I went in the Army Air Corps as a pilot trainee.
Yes. Okay. What was your child like before you enlisted in the war?
My child life?
Your childhood.
Oh, I had one brother who was 2.5 years younger than I was. My father was in the insurance business. My mother didn't work. She took care of the household and everything until World War II came along. And then she worked for Hood's Rubber, making raincoats for the military for World War II. She and her sisters and friends.
Okay. When you were growing up, did you always know that you wanted to enlist in the military?
No. My father was in the Navy for World War I, and I had taken all the tests for Navy pilot and passed them. And this was in my senior year of high school, and they closed the program with the Navy, so I immediately went down and took the testing for the Army Air Corps and passed those. So that became my goal at the time. Everyone was in, it was World War II, and every family was involved.
Yeah. As a child, what was your understanding of war?
Well, in my day, we had ancient history, so it started out with ancient history and what transpired, and I had a few comments from my father, from World War I, and everyone had the spirit. Everyone was enthusiastic about supporting the country.
Okay. When you enlisted, what made you decide to go into the Air Force?
Well, I loved. I started driving a car when I was 11. My dad used to take me over by the cemetery road, put a soft hat on me, sit on a pillow, and I loved everything mechanical. The day I was 16, I went down to 100 Causeway Street in Boston and got my driver's license. And I worked for a couple of grocery stores, going down to the market with a big truck and then delivering orders. So I worked pretty much all the way through high school.
Okay. What were your family's feelings when you enlisted in the Air Force?
Well, as I said, everyone had the spirit ever since December 7th, 1941. My father took me down to the South Station to join the other cadets that had been selected. My mother didn't want to go down to see me off, but my father, he cried.
So, how did joining the military affect some of your relationships at home?
Well, I was young. I was just turned 19 a few days after I got in the service. I didn't have a girlfriend at home. So I had friends, but most of the guys I went around with were already in the military.
Oh.
So the only effect it had was on my family, immediate family and relatives. and it was just a thing to do for one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, every family had someone involved in the military in that period of time. It's not like it is today.
Yeah. So, did you have any friends that you enlisted with?
No, no. I was there were about 40 of us that went on this one train, then down to Greensville, North Carolina, where we were put through basic training, and then sent to. I was sent to West Virginia University for 5 months, I believe it was, and we had we went through college courses there, and then and we had 10 hours of pilot training in a little Piper Cub flying out of the airport in West Virginia. Is that enough, or do you want more?
That's enough.
Okay. I don't want to keep rambling on.
Oh no, we're interviewing you, so you can say
Okay.
anything. How did you feel when you found out you were being drafted?
I wasn't drafted. I volunteered.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
But I probably I would have been, I assume, because the draft board was pretty active.
What was it like living so far from home?
Now that's a good question, because in my recollection, I had never been away from my family until till I got on that train. We had done everything. All our vacations were done together. So it was a pretty closely knit family.
Yeah, so you say that you were close with your family. Did you have any siblings that enlisted?
Yes, my brother, who was 2 years and 4 months younger than I, he joined the Navy.
Oh, my cousin just joined the Navy. What was boot camp like?
It was a shocker, for one thing. We worked 50 minutes and we had 10 minutes off, and this was in North Carolina, and it was hot as Hades. You get a chance to get, they had what they call a lister bag, hung from a tree, and you could get water and you get salt pills. You had to take the salt pills because you were perspiring a great deal. It was an education.
What kind of friendships did you have with people during your service?
Well, I got out after World War II, and I still had some contacts that I made in pilot training and first year or so after I graduated. And then I started flying out of Hanscom Airfield in the reserves. I wanted to continue flying as a pilot, but the only other option was to go with the commercial airlines. And in those days, you stayed on for 4 months, and then they furloughed you, and then they hired you back. And I already had a wife and a kid by then, so I felt I joined the reserve. So that's how I got wound up back in the Air Force and made a career of it.
So what were the everyday conditions like where you were serving?
It all depended where you were serving. We, as a cadet, we got really good meals most of the time, but you went through the first 3 or 4 months was pre-flight, and that was at Maxwell Field, Alabama, and that was not flying. It was all groundwork, college stuff and stuff like that. And then we went to Decatur, Alabama, which was a private pilot training business, actually. And that was, we flew the open cockpit PT-17 with a biplane, had 2 wings, and we had no contact with the ground once we got airborne. And there were a couple of girls' schools that were around there. We used to buzz every so often.
What might a typical day be like in the Air Force?
Oh, okay. It was usually broken down into three as a cadet. Now, it was different after you got your wings, but as a cadet, you were in ground school for half a day, you flew for a half a day, and you had instrument training with a simulator for so it's split up 3 ways usually, and you were kept down busy, very busy.
Yes. So, did you have any free time during your service?
Yes, we had what they called open post, where you could go out. You'd have the weekend off if you behaved. You know, if you got the merits, you walked through us. But you could go down, you know, to whatever town you were close by. They had dances and stuff like that, and they had USO in most places. So it was good, honest fun.
Was there anything specific that you did during that time?
The time as a cadet or after I graduated?
Time as a cadet.
Well, we were pretty busy. We really didn't get much time off. They called it open post when if you went to a dance or something like that would be the time off.
So when did you first leave the country for the Air Force?
I never left the country for the Air Force. During World War II, I was in this country all the time. I ferried. That means I transported B-24s. It was the biggest 4-engine bomber that we had at the time. And there was a crew of 3, 2 pilots and a mechanic. And the first job we had, we were waiting for an assignment to go overseas, first to Europe, and then VE Day came, and then went back to Lincoln, Nebraska to get a crew to go over to the Far East, and then the war was declared over. So my job was to ferry what we call war wearies, aircraft that had been in combat, and B-24s especially, because I'd had special training in the B-24s. So, and then I did that until I was told I was eligible to get out, which I did. I was anxious to get out, actually.
Yeah. So then how long did you spend fighting in the war?
Well, I didn't really fight in the war, in World War II, because I graduated in December of 1944 to the pilot training. So the closest I got to combat in those days was flying the aircraft. What they would do in Europe when VE Day came, they put 2 crews on a B-24 and send them back to Bradley Field, Connecticut here. And I would pick one up at Bradley Field and fly it mostly to Tucson, Arizona, where they pickled them. They jacked up the things and seasoned them so they could be put back into active duty.
Can you describe what VE Day is?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's Victory Europe. And VJ Day was Victory Japan. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So what was the hardest decision you had to make during your service?
Well, I had several emergencies while flying, but I've got about 5,000 hours, and mostly in large aircraft. I don't have much single engine time. Of the 5,000, half of it's in 4-engine and half in twin engine. We've had incidents in the aircraft and stuff like that. So what was the question now?
The question was, what was the hardest decision you had to make?
Okay, when I was called back to active duty, which was in 1951, I already had a wife and 2 sons. And so I went home and gave her the good news. I didn't have an option. I had to go back on active duty. But I was assigned to Langley Field, Virginia, and as an adjutant to a aircraft maintenance squadron. And within a year, they were going to put together a division with two fighter bomber wings and 1 bomber wing and 1 division. And they were going to England. Now this is right with Korea was just going on. And so they wanted me to go and to be the adjutant for a big group. That's about 700 or 800 people. So I went home and I told my wife, when I came on active duty, I had signed up for 21 months. And then I was supposed to have been released then at the 21 months. So I had to go indefinite if I wanted to take up that, be in the with the group going over to England. I went home and my wife concurred. She liked the English and that kind of stuff. So went over and spent 3 years in England. And my reward for 3 years in England, I was signed back to the States as a pilot on KC-97s, that's air refueling. And I spent a great deal of my, another 6 years in that area.
So were there any other wars that you had served in?
Well, not actually. I had, there's Korea, and but I wasn't actually in the combat area.
Okay, so what is a B-24 again?
A B-24?
Yeah.
Wait a minute, I might have a picture of one. Would that help?
Yeah.
If I could, you want to stop that or?
Oh no, it's rare.
Oh, okay. Oh. See if we can find. I guess it must be a mic. No, here. I don't know if I can pick out it. I'm not very good at this stuff. It never seems to want to do exactly what I want it to do. Okay. A lot of my kids, and I've got 7 great-grandkids that live on the Cape.
Oh, really?
And gosh.
Has anyone in your family enlisted since you did?
Well, my brother did. He went enlisted in the Navy, but he never went back after he had spent his time in there. Huh. Come on. Well, I'm not doing well here. That's a B-24, what you can see of it.
Oh, wow.
If you ever go over, they have them fly here once a year usually.
Yeah, so is this after you had served, this photo?
Yeah, this is since I've been back here.
Mm.
Yeah. Actually, I flew in this particular airplane from from Hyannis to Plymouth when they restaged them over there to run. They had the static display like this, but you could also sign up and pay to take a trip in it. Short trip.
Mm. So earlier you had said that there were some incidents on the aircrafts.
Emergencies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Were there
When you're with all that mechanical stuff, there's always something going wrong.
So what were some of your responsibilities when you were a pilot?
Whatever the mission was, you had it. But I didn't just fly airplanes. Part of my service was a total of 4 years was in administration. I flew every month and all that stuff, but my primary job was behind a desk as an adjutant and personnel officer. Mm. And then I had another tour with Strategic Air Command, and we ran exercises in penetrations into the United States, all throughout the whole United States, and we had scramble fighters, and we fought a war, and then we went back into the tapes and saw what worked and what didn't. And I did that for 4 years. In the last job I had, I ran the Command and Control Center at Elmendorf Air Force Base, which is in Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska. That was a busy time.
Yeah. So what is your favorite experience from serving?
Well, I think it's the comradeship with the people that you work with. Hopefully you had a worthwhile mission. You know, whatever your assignment was really necessary and worked out.
You can continue.
Yeah. I'm guessing that's pretty much it.
Okay. Did you have a specific mission that you enjoyed the most?
Well, I got a couple of thousand hours flying air refueling at all over the world, actually. In Strategic Air Command, you went 90 days TDY, that's temporary duty, someplace in the world, not a choice place. North Africa, Goose Bay, Labrador, a couple of times in North Africa. The Azores, there for at least a half a year, which meant you had to leave your family. And that was the part that wasn't enjoyable. But even then, I was the plans officer for our squadron. So I knew when we were going the next time before anyone else knew.
So what jobs did you do in North Africa and Alaska?
Well, in Alaska, which was the last assignment I had, I ran the Command and Control Center, which is the nerve center of an installation. And you had control over all the aircraft that flew out of Elmendorf. I had 5 or 6 pilots all the time, plus NCOs. We ran a 24-hour day, 7-day operation. Only time I ever got away from the thing was when I went camping, because in those days we didn't have these, so they couldn't get a hold of you.
So what might your worst experience be from your service?
Well, one time we were staging 20 aircraft, or 21, from Lockburn Air Force Base, which is Columbus, Ohio, to Sidi Slimane, North Africa. And I was flying, I was an instructor pilot, and my whole crew were instructors other than the co-pilot. in this because you had a crew of 7, and we fanned out and rode with other crews. So I had to fly a crew because the pilot was very qualified, but he didn't have enough time to carry any passengers. He had to have certain requirements. So we got to Harmon in Newfoundland and Arrowan, that means remained overnight, and we took the 20 aircraft off. About 2 hours out, it was about an 11-hour flight. 2 hours out, my engineer reported that we had a belly full of fuel. We carried fuel in tanks within the plane, plus the tanks that were built into the airplane. So it was loaded with fuel, and so I said, well, there'll be no smoking except in the cockpit. And I got clearance when I was maybe the 12th aircraft in the stream. And I had designed how I was going to do this because the flap motors and the generator, all the electrical stuff was sitting right over that fuel, and I didn't want an explosion. So we got a clearance, and we let down gently so that the fuel stayed fairly stable until it was time to go in for the final landing. And as I had to nose down a little, the fuel moved forward. I had already put the flaps down and the gear down, and I said, don't touch any switches from here on out. Well, we got there, and the fumes started to come up in the cockpit, and you couldn't see. So I made the co-pilot open his window so it would siphon the fumes out of the cockpit. And we landed safely. Here I am.
Yeah.
That was one incident. There's been, many. But that's what you train for, too. You don't just get in it like a car and kick the tires and go. You have to know every system that's in an aircraft.
So what was the training like for that?
Well, you had ground school, and you learned about every system within the aircraft itself. And then you had probably fly 20 to 30 hours in the aircraft with an instructor, and he would put you through the different maneuvers and stuff that you'd have to be able to do. And then you would have a combat crew together, and that was it. You stayed together. We did pull alert often. That was not a fun deal. We used to pull it one aircraft at a time, but then when I'm trying to figure out which war it was, that we you were what we call married to your crew. You had a crew of 7, and they had a building made by the runway.
So if you were to go back in time to when you were serving, would you have done anything differently?
No, I had the opportunity. But as I said, I enjoyed flying, despite some of the good and the bad of it. But I think I made the right choices. There's no way to back up on them now.
Yeah. So what is one thing that you took away from your time serving?
Probably personal discipline. I would say that's probably the most important thing, and the necessity to coordinate with other people.
So what are some of your views about war after serving?
Well, there's an expression, war is hell, and there's no way around it. I mean, they just had Battle of the Bulge history this last week, and over 16,000 men, our families, our guys, were killed over there for that one thing. So it certainly levels out the playing field, but it's horrible.
So how often do you think back to your time in the service?
Well, not too often now, unless some incident. Although
All right then. So, in conclusion to our interview today, is there anything else you would like to share about?
no, I think it's quite interesting that you're doing this,
Yeah.
and it's educating all of us, us, the interview and the interviewer. So I hope, and this is going to be salvaged or something for on file someplace.
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. Well, I've enjoyed it. It shook up a few memories I've had. But other than that, and you two young ladies are very nice. You've done a super job. Just need more memory, right?
Okay.
Anything else?
We would just like to say thank you for doing this interview with us, and thank you for your service.
It's never. I've never been interviewed like this before, so this is entertaining as well as informative. Okay, shut down.